Hey, it's Zoe. Today we're talking about how it's not about the money, honey. There are 5 currencies that employees and volunteers care about and what you should do about it as a leader. Let's do this thing.
Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
Great to be here. I've had a brilliant week up at the snow skiing, and one evening, after a few wines, the guys started talking about their Aussie childhood memories. And one of the shows that they were discussing was one I hadn't heard of before, which was called Bill and Ben, the Flower Pot Men. Now, Aussies, some of you may recall this. This was new to me. And it was hilarious. So if you haven't come across Bill and Ben, the Flower Pot Men, the original series, the kind of black and white paper cutout graphics, do yourself a favor and go and have a look on YouTube and Google Bill and Ben, the Flower Pot Men, and their sidekick, Weed. Yeah, there's some crazy kids show that happened in the 1950s, and that was one of them. So that was a delightful initiation to yet more Australiana that I was not aware of. Enjoy. The little chook update, we've got one chicken who is now starting to lay again after the long winter, which is the first signs of spring. Hurrah! About every other day or so, there's a little magical egg. And the rest of them, well, they're just freeloaders. They gripe every morning if we don't let them out in time, and they gripe if they don't like the food that you put out. And yet, what do they produce? Nothing but poop. All right, I'm sure there's a metaphor for something useful in that, but in the meantime, let's get into talking about currencies. Completely unrelated. What kind of segue was that? So I got a question from one of the readers around currencies and how to engage volunteers, actually. And they said that a large part of their workforce is actually volunteers who show up a few hours a week. So how do you apply all the engagement strategies when it comes to volunteers? I actually don't think there's a huge difference around how you engage volunteers and how you engage employees, with a small differentiator, and that's understanding currencies. There's actually a hierarchy of currencies for why people go to work and engage with work, whether paid or not. And at the very base, the base motivator for currencies is the survival currency. So why do people go to work? They need to survive. They need money in particular in order to gain the provisions and shelter, etc. that they need. Before modern day salaries, it was survival needs of work providing shelter and food, etc. directly. Now it's more couched in financial terms. So survival currency is kind of the number one. Obviously with volunteers, because they're not asking for money or requiring money, this is not one of the main currencies, but it's not the only currency that drives people to go to work and to contribute their time and energy. So survival needs, I think, are pretty important, and getting this right is a fine balance. And it becomes a point of contention, doesn't it, when you're managing staff? How much money is enough money? And when they get shirty about not having enough, what is that all about? There's even some great research that's come out to say that people who earn more than $70,000 a year aren't necessarily any happier. So that's kind of like the latest research saying that 70 grand is how much you actually need just to be happy. Below that, you're kind of eking out an existence, and above that, it doesn't actually add to your happiness. Well, I think that's an interesting point. I don't necessarily think that's got the full story, though, because it's not just about the money, honey. The other aspects of showing up to work and contributing is the next level of engagement, and that's about the sense of belonging. And each of these currencies, by the way, is related to our stage of leadership maturity. Survival is our basic functioning as human beings. The next level of belonging is kind of a very deep primal one as well, because we have survived as a species because we have been community oriented. And creating a sense of belonging in our tribe back in cave people days was important for our literal physical safety as well as our social safety. Over the millennia, that has evolved into a sense of community. And our sense of belonging is a way we feel a sense of emotional and relational safety. And there is strengths in being part of a community. And when we realize that, we make actually a fairly significant developmental shift. Usually it happens in our childhood, when we realize that it's better together and that we have more fun and get more done when we're doing stuff with other folks. The sense of contemporary community happens in workplaces. These are local modern-day tribes, if you like. And that sense of belonging is really, really important to us in terms of us feeling safe and secure. And when that's threatened, we can go into survival mode. So for volunteers, that is also a key motivator. To be having a sense of belonging and community is one of the driving factors that causes people to put their hand up to volunteer. They want to be part of something. They want to be part of a group of people doing some good. So belonging is a pretty important currency, and that applies to both volunteers and staff. And how you foster that is pretty important. And that comes down to how you manage your culture, the rituals that you put in place, and that kind of thing. The third currency I think we need to pay attention to is the one of recognition. Now, this is an interesting one because in terms of leadership maturity, there's a huge shift that goes from I want to belong to the tribe to then I want to be recognized within the tribe. It's a huge, huge developmental shift. The first one, the sense of belonging, it's all about maintaining status quo, of fitting in, of following the rules. The next stage of development is actually, I want to stand out from the tribe. I want to be seen as special. And this kind of recognition is a key esteem driver, and it's a healthy developmental shift. And as leaders, we need to manage both the sense of managing rules and belonging and status quo, as well as singling out and recognizing individuals. This applies for both staff and volunteers. Volunteers want to feel a sense of belonging, and they also want that sense of recognition, that sense of appreciation. Now, how do you do that? And I think this is where we can often blunder with volunteers in particular, is they don't necessarily want tangible goods. After all, if you're volunteering for a charity, you're doing that because you appreciate the purpose of the charity and you want to make a difference by donating your time, expertise, etc., and money in some cases. So they often say that individuals who support organizations either have time, treasure, or talent to contribute. Time is an obvious one through volunteering, treasure is money, and talent is donating expertise. So in the case of volunteers who aren't donating money but are donating their time or their talent, getting recognized through financial goods or goods purchased through finances can often backfire. So here's an example. And I did some significant charity work for an organization a few years back. And at the end of the year, they sent us a huge basket of goodies, like a huge hamper. It would have cost at least $200. And the thought, when I received that, I was a bit dismayed, to be honest. I thought, well, that's a really nice gesture. They're trying to appreciate us, and they're spending all that money. Like, we volunteered, we did all this work so they could have more money, not to spend it back on us. We wanted the money to go to the cause, to the people they were helping. So it was kind of, that gesture was tarnished because for us, that wasn't how we wanted to be appreciated. We didn't want the organization to spend their resources on appreciating us. Like, we didn't need a hamper. Like, not a great way to recognize us. You know what would have been a great way to recognize us is for the CEO or for the chairperson to pick up the phone and to call us and to say, thank you. That would have meant way more to me than the basket of goodies. Why? Because it's a personal recognition. It took time and effort to do that. And time and effort are non-renewable resources. So for someone to carve out a special event like that is huge. And I think this is the single most underrated, underutilized tool in the leadership toolkit in terms of showing appreciation. A simple, genuine thank you a human interpersonal connection has huge amounts of currency. Some people like it publicly, and others shy away from being from public appreciation. So I have a client who was absolutely mortified at a staff meeting when his boss singled him out and said what a terrific job he did on this particular project and finished it on time with great accuracy, and it meant a huge achievement for the organization as a whole. He was horrified by that because he didn't want that public recognition. He would have enjoyed private recognition. So how do you tell the difference with your staff? How do you get it right or wrong? Well, you just have to get to know them. And yeah, that takes a lot of effort. So especially with volunteers where you only see them a couple hours a week. And yet, if you go the extra few minutes to find out what's meaningful to them, what would make a difference to them in terms of the appreciation factor, you can get it right. And you can leverage that currency in terms of building loyalty and buy-in. It's not just a transactional process. It also feels good. I mean, how good is it when you reach out to someone and say thank you and you see their face light up? It's amazing. So recognition is the third status. And the third currency. The fourth currency that we need to pay attention to is status. And this is also part of a huge leadership developmental shift. So it's part of that phase of wanting to rise above the crowd, so stand out from the crowd. And that sense of status is particularly important to us in the early days of our career. It never kind of leaves us, though. I know this because I have a status hot button. And if my sense of expertise or my sense of status as an expert is threatened, by someone ignoring my advice or belittling my experience, then I go into survival mode. It's one of my triggers. Not proud of it, but there it is. And status is an easy way to build esteem in the people that you either lead as staff or lead as volunteers. How do you do that? You can do it through symbolic gestures. Traditional ones are through salary, title promotions, privileged position in the workplace, that kind of thing. So if you don't have those capacities for volunteers, what can you do? Well, you can give them a title change like head volunteer or master volunteer or something like that. You could also give them a different kind of uniform or a badge of some sort. It doesn't have to be hugely expensive. And it doesn't have to cause rancor either. And that's sort of why you also have, in the bushfire service, say, for example, they recognize years of service. And to get your 20-year service badge in the fire service, they have this little medal that they give out. It's not a lot, and yet it's meaningful. It's meaningful that you are a veteran, you've donated 20 years of your life and time towards firefighting. And that's significant. That's recognition and status. And that kind of kudos helps. These are emotional reasons. These are emotional currencies, and they go deep. They go really deep, whether it's for staff or for volunteers. I think that's an important one. The fifth currency, and it's also one of the most important ones for both staff and volunteers, is meaning. We show up at work not just for the money, not just for those esteem needs. Those are all important. And yet, we stay at the workplace when the work is meaningful for us. So having a sense of purpose is one of the critical things we need to feel engaged with what we're doing. Lots of research has been done around this, and that sense of another aspect of that is the sense of progress in meaningful work. So when people volunteer for an organization, primarily one of the reasons they do is because they believe in the cause or want to believe in the cause. Whether that's supporting people with diabetes or with Alzheimer's Foundation, or they have some sort of personal experience with the medical cause, say, for example, or maybe it's an animal cause, an animal rights cause. So I have a friend who's a vegan, and she only supports organizations that help animals, say, for example. So there's this attachment of values to the organization's purpose that is pretty strong currency for volunteers and for staff. And we don't always pay enough attention to this. We just assume like it's a good cause, people show up. They'll just do it because they care. We can make that so much easier and better for folks to remember and remind themselves of why they're doing this if we make the organization's results and purpose far more visible. And so when we measure the result that we're trying to achieve through the organization, it makes a huge difference. And when we make it visible, it makes it clear the kind of impact we're making. So an example of that. So often I've supported the Cancer Council. It would be terrific if they made more visible somewhere on their site all the things that they've done with the money that they've raised and implemented. So the number of people that they've serviced, the number of workshops they've run, that kind of stuff, so that we can see progress year to year. Maybe it's like even things like the diminishment of number of cancer cases or the improvement in death rates or improvement in survival rates in particular cancers that their research has supported, that kind of stuff, that makes volunteers excited because it shows a connection from their activity to the bigger picture. And that works for both volunteers and staff. So most organizations are not doing this that well. They don't make it a point of showing up their results in a visible way. So this sense of progress and meaningful work is a pretty critical currency, and it's probably the more fundamental. Because it's easy to give up on an organization if you think, what's the point? Are we getting anywhere with this? It just feels like an endless battle going nowhere. And if you don't have the other currencies, you don't have the recognition, you don't have any status, there isn't a sense of community or belonging, you just show up and you punch in and you punch out. And that's when the money thing comes up. It's like, well, I'm not getting paid for this, or I'm not getting paid enough for this. And that becomes the reason why people leave. But it's not the whole reason. It's the excuse, really. It's kind of the trigger point. I'd love to hear your experience with different currencies and what you think is powerful when we're trying to engage staff and volunteers. A couple of good resources, too, that I'll leave you with. One is Seth Godin's book, Tribes. And he's got 3 key principles, he says, that are important for us to create tribes worth belonging to. And he says, you've got to have a cause that people believe in. Number 1. The next piece is having a platform for people to communicate who are part of that cause or want to support that cause. And then you need a leader to galvanize all that. So in your organization, do you have those 3 things? Do you have a cause that you believe in, that others believe in too? Do you have a platform where people can connect around that idea? And do you have a leader who can galvanize the troops and make the progress visible? So that's Seth Godin's contribution to that. And Simon Sinek, how could you go past him? Google him, read his books, watch his TED Talks. And he says, people will follow you if they believe what you believe. So speaking from the heart about your beliefs and values is one of the critical ways of keeping that meaningful progress, that meaning behind the work, completely visible. That's it for now. Enjoy the rest of your day. Live well, lead well.